Okay, and we're back. Hello, Bradley. How you doing? Can you tell me how to pronounce your last name? Is it Chatha? Chatha?
Chatha.
Chatha. Okay, I was wrong on both counts. All right, so can you do us a favor and introduce yourself and the talk for the benefit of future Q&A video viewers?
So I'm Brad. I've been programming as a hobby for 10 years, and I've chosen D as my main language. This talk is a beginner-oriented talk to show off what D can do with its metaprogramming. So hopefully it'll inspire some people. It'll help beginners to get an idea of what's actually possible. It can be quite surprising what D actually can do. If you're more experienced, it won't be too beneficial, but again, beginner-orientated.
I've never talked to you about your experiences with D before. This is the first time we've ever talked face-to-face, so I'm curious, what brought you to the D programming language initially?
So I was coding in C# for about a year or two. I wanted to move down to a lower level language. I think I used a setter code to just look across different languages. D caught my eye for some reason, and then like one thing led to another, and here I am.
I've seen people talk about Rosetta Code snippets in the forums, but I've never actually looked at Rosetta Code. Were you there explicitly looking for a language to use, or was it just happenstance that you found D?
It's kind of in the middle, I guess. I was looking for a language, but I wasn't actively looking for one. I was just kind of glancing.
So the fact that you were amenable to picking up a new language means you weren't completely happy or satisfied with what you were already using. Can you talk about that a little bit? Any things you were finding lacking in C# or other languages you were using?
I wouldn't say lacking, but more, I was just really curious. I had some exposure to C++ from a former friend, and I was like, I'm never going to touch this language. It's awful, in my opinion, at least. Well, it's not awful, but you know what I mean.
What motivated this talk about templates? I get the impression it's because you've spent a lot of time diving into them and you liked what you found.
In my opinion, metaprogramming is D's biggest feature that sets it apart from all the other languages. Because sure, you got your nice features like UFCS, you got mixed high level and low level. But it's really metaprogramming that I think D should get most of its strength from. But it can be quite obtuse. It can be quite, as I said, surprising and unintuitive about what D is actually capable of achieving. I wanted to create a quick kind of primer to showcase some of the things you can actually do with D.
So I love that screenshot of the error messages that you have there. That is something, depending on what you're doing and who you talk to, these error messages, template error messages, can be very helpful or very WTF. Did this affect you when you were picking up these metaprogramming? Was it a hurdle for you to get through the error messages?
Definitely, especially since I learned it. I started learning D when the error messages weren't as good as they are right now. So currently now, it's just kind of like second nature to pass through lobs of nothing.
I like your approach here of going step by step, starting with the basics of templated functions and then gradually increasing, to specialization and all that. How long did it take you to pick this stuff up? I mean, was it a quick learn or was it a slog?
That's a really hard question to answer. I think I just very slowly learned over time. I've been using D since around 2014, 2015. That's obviously a lot of time to pick things up.
Did you have any kind of background in actual generic, a template system aside from generics? I guess C# has generics, right?
C# has generics, yeah.
Yeah.
I had zero experience with template programming at that point. It was my first foray into things, and this completely spoiled me.
Aside from the error messages, what was the most difficult hurdle to get over?
I think I'd say learning how the compiler itself works at compile time. That makes sense. like how it sees all this compile time data, what you can actually do with it, especially like alias versus enum, things like that.
These templates clicked pretty immediately for me. The thing that tripped me up was always alias parameters in the beginning. I don't know why they confused me. I mean, eventually it clicked, but it just it was a little difficult to get through. Did you find any trouble with that, alias parameters?
Definitely found issue with them. I couldn't really tell at the start what the difference between alias and enum things really were. But yeah, as same with you, eventually clicked and it all made sense.
What would you recommend? I mean, you go through this step by step, but what would you recommend a new deprogrammer with no template experience? How would you recommend that they go about learning everything? I mean, this is a good introduction to what's out there and could be used as a guide to step by step progress. But where would you, what source materials would you recommend that they start with?
So source material, Ali Sorelli's book has quite a good introduction onto templates and UDAs. Definitely recommend that. Find reading through the spec can be quite helpful sometimes. But in general, I'll just say try and learn things one step at a time, because as I mentioned in the video, the metaprogramming is basically Lego. So you want to learn all the building blocks so you then can learn how to put them all together.
What's your favorite metaprogramming feature?
I'd say anything to do with introspection, because you can do a lot of weird shenanigans with it.
Why does introspection float your boat?
Designed by introspection, it's just magical. Like using the same interface, you can have extremely different implementations, but because of these code gen abilities, you can also have it extremely optimized specifically for the specific input you pass through the template parameters. Just find it very interesting.
I know you have that JCLI project, and you're using a lot of compile time stuff for that. Why don't you elaborate on that a little bit? How are you using metaprogramming and compile time features in JCLI?
I guess the first thing is you can actually use you can actually pass modules directly into alias template parameters. So one of the things JCLI is able to do is iterate over the modules you pass through and look for anything marked with the @command UDA to find your commands. Then from there follows a bit of convention. Like commands have to always have a function called onExecute, depending on what it returns. It allows you to control whether you have a status code or not. Just very declarative in general. So like if you mark an argument as nullable, then it becomes optional. That's all just introspection, being able to give you a really fluent and declarative interface.
What's your deprogramming style? I mean, are you a heavy metaprogrammer, or do you make use of a lot of the OOP features, or do you keep it more C style? How do you approach deprogramming?
Don't really use OOP that much anymore. So I'd say a mix of C kind of style and very heavy metaprogramming. I like to shoehorn into it wherever I can.
Have you run into any problems with memory usage and compile times if you're doing heavy metaprogramming? Do you have any projects that big that affect? Oh.
Just as one example, a random person I didn't know contacted me. He made his own markdown language, contacted me to see if I could try and make a D parser and emitter for it. So I decided to use the new std.sum type as the AST, and my compile times just blew up. Well, I say blew up, but like sub-second to a couple of seconds to like about 10 seconds in total, with relatively little code. Another example would be Dave Plummer's drag race. I decided to see what would happen if we try to calculate the entire sieve of Aristophanes. If you try to unroll the entire loop at compile time, so 1,000,000 times plus times a lot of other times, LDC used over 200 gigabytes of memory before Windows decided to just kill it outright. Of course, that's an extreme example, but it does still kind of apply that to general code.
Yeah, that's a long-term goal to bring down memory usage at compile time, especially. We have a question here in the live stream. Attila already gave one answer to it, but I'll give you the opportunity to answer it too. I want to contribute to dlang and I am a beginner. How do I start? Attila recommended that we have issues that are tagged on Bugzilla for beginners, but do you have anything to add to that?
So yeah, looking through Bugzilla probably be good stuff. That's what I try to do when I was looking for things to like try and help a bit to contribute. I haven't really contributed that much. So since this person, I kind of feel like I'm too underskilled to really help out. So I think just looking for something, going like, this is an issue for me. I want to try and fix it, even if I might not be able to. Just give it a try. Hope for the best.
Not a question, but we have a comment in the live chat from Ate Escola. He says this is designed by Introspection, basically explained in one video.
It's definitely a goal. Yeah. And as you know, I talk directly about design by Introspection.
Are you actually employing that in any of your code right now?
A little, I guess. I have a Lua library called Lumars that has a helper function called register. So basically, you can just feed it D functions and it automatically create a Lua wrapper around it because it knows what the return types are, it knows what the parameters are, so it knows exactly what it needs to generate. So we have to see that's all very simple, straightforward, and it does all the heavy lifting behind the scenes due to being able to introspect all the information it needs.
Have you gone beyond what's documented and what you know and started experimenting and pushing the limits to see what you can and can't do?
A little bit. I was writing like a toy game 3 years back, and for the UI system, I have this mess of a UDA system. So I wanted a UDA to be able to refer to members of a class. I found that the compiler doesn't actually like that. If you pass two member symbols to a template, for some reason, the compiler just wouldn't have it. It might have been two different classes, but something like that would cause a compiler error, at the time at least. And you just found that weirdly limiting.
What has been the biggest problem for you in programming overall? Not just in metaprogramming, but just as a whole?
Ecosystem, beyond a doubt. So I'm like, I've went on rants in the forum about this before. It's like, why would I use 5D compared to ASP.NET or Golang libraries, which are super well documented, have great performance, are really easy to use, and there's just tons of support and really stable, etc., etc. And then you have D libraries, which tend to break when you off at them.
Is there any particular library you'd like to see in the ecosystem that's not there now, or anything like VibeD besides VibeD that you'd like to see improved upon in some way?
I think my personal pet peeve is in regards to memory management. It's really hard to write a library in D where if you ever want to like cater to anything other than the GC, you have really bad options. There's no standard memory management outside of the GC. There's no standard containers outside of the GC. Ref counting, all that stuff.
Let's go to the other end now. What has really shined for you aside from metaprogramming?
How smart, I guess, how much intelligence there is in this community. There's some ridiculously smart people in this community, and it's just kind of like an honor to be able to talk with them, be able to like see their discussions, see how their brain kind of ticks in regards to language design and so on. It's just really enlightening and unique.
We have a question in the live stream from Brian Callahan. What would be the first step towards resolving any of your pet peeves?
I think getting phobos sorted out, so there's a good, really solid groundwork. Because at the moment, going back to memory management, you have like 4 different libraries that are all completely incompatible with one another. They may or may not use allocators. They may or may not use the dub version of allocators or phobos. It's just a complete mess, and there's no groundwork there for you to work on. Having got that groundwork into something like phobos 3D2 maybe would be really beneficial to sorting out those issues.
Okay, Steve says that UDAs might be one of the best additions to metaprogramming ever. That's not a question, but I'm curious, do you agree? Is it being designed by introspection?
Yeah, designed by introspection. Just being able to attach any arbitrary like metadata onto anything at all is extremely powerful, because then you can like introspect it, generate code from it, just do whatever.
Ethan says, having re-implemented what Manu was writing that caused him to request UDAs, I agree. That would have been very difficult without it, and my extended use of UDAs is even better. Have you used any other metaprogramming helper libraries out in the ecosystem?
I don't think I've used any helper libraries, but I use things like the silly unit test library, where you just attach strings as UDAs onto unit tests, and it just automatically picks them up. You can filter by them. It displays all the unit tests by the name you give them. It's a lot better than the built-in one, at least.
Adam says that UDAs are nice, but you can get most things done without them. Agree or disagree?
Yes. Most languages don't have UDAs. But it allows you to do things that otherwise couldn't be done, which I think is the main point you push.
Ethan now just says that as an example of his extended use, he uses UDAs quite heavily in serialization paths to redirect the auto serializer to another serialization path for different types. Binary UUIDs versus string UUIDs, for example.
That could just be as simple as like attaching at binary UUID to a symbol, and then one step give later and you have completely different behavior.
John Storm says, your presentation was comprehensive. Is there anything that can be done differently, or does D basically get it right? Or is there even a right?
So it's dangerous to say that there is a right, but I think D is pretty much one of the leaders in metaprogramming already. It's hard to really make a comparison of what is missing when it already has most of it, as far as my own knowledge is concerned. So there's always room for improvement, but I don't know what exactly that could be.
And they're talking about UDAs being allowed on parameters. Are you using them for parameters?
It's too annoying. It just doesn't work as you expect it. You have to do this weird slicing hack, and it just doesn't make any sense, and it's just no good.
Slicing hack?
It's kind of hard to explain, but you have to go kind of like get the parameter as a slice, like as a tuple, then slice that tuple, and it's like madness.
What are your goals going forward? Are you planning to keep digging deeper into metaprogramming? Are you looking to, do you have any funky library ideas using metaprogramming that you would like to put out there? Or what's the future look like for you?
My future is just ticking away for whatever comes to mind at the moment. I'm quite kind of ADHD-ish with my programming. One day I feel like working on JCLI, next like brainstorming about build systems, the next just whatever. There's no like concrete plan, just winging it.
Ethan says no serialize is my at no serialize is my favorite UDA in my code, as is at UDA to tag structs only intended to be used as UDAs. No, that's something.
That's an interesting usage.
Yeah.
Well, I guess. Yeah. It's kind of like app properties current state. Barely does anything, but it's really useful for self-documentation.
What's the coolest compile time trick you've learned or that you've seen?
Kind of hard to say because I just find everything about it cool. Well, I like that you can use static void to generate switch cases. There's some quite exotic uses, I feel. I make very heavy use of static void. because
Yeah,
it's just such a powerful code gen.
Mm.
Cool. I think one of the interesting usages of static for each to like inject and generate functions and variables within another type, as you kind of saw in the presentation. So like you have a templated AST type, you could automatically generate all the fields you need, all the union, the tags, and everything just using static for each. Another interesting use of metaprogramming, and I think I talked about this in the original version I didn't go with, is black boxing things. So like use a function to generate another function while you still have the compile time information, but the function itself is a statically known delegate or something with a static interface. So you use all the compile time information to generate the function, but then you can still keep it around the compile time really easy, runtime really easily. So like one example would be with commands and help text. You generate all the help text at compile time, then just stuff that into a function with a single unified interface, and that's black boxing it.
Steve says, I can't think of any questions because I literally agree with almost everything in the talk. D is awesome, and metaprogramming in D is very awesome. And it was a well done talk. You covered a lot of bases there. Bastian has a question. Is there anything you miss in metaprogramming functionality?
So recently I've wanted to get the names of the parameter names of functions. I understand that's got quite a few limitations because functions don't have to specify parameter names. But it'd be nice to be able to get to them properly if they do have them.
Ikatsu asks, how do you feel about the __ traits syntax? Although the overall metaprogramming experience in D is amazing, sometimes the heavy usage of it turns the code kind of hard to read.
Do you agree? It can be hard to read, but trying to like spread out usages, like instead of trying to stuff it all into one single if statement, like you know how like just in normal runtime code, you sometimes split out a long statement across multiple variables. You kind of do that with metaprogramming. I do agree it's quite ugly, especially considering how needed and powerful __ traits is. But there's really much you can do about it at this point.
Well, that was an intentional decision way back when to make it ugly.
I guess it just outgrew the original plan.
Again, just like Stefan said, that's back in the days before metaprogramming became the big thing it is. But, I just got to mention the thing about compile times. I know this is a big bugbear with Attila, but D is the only language community that I've ever participated in where people complain about 10-second compile times. I'm serious. I'm like,
Yeah.
10 seconds. It's 10 friggin' seconds. That is amazing. But no, it's got to be Adam. Oh my God. 10-second compiles are brutally awful. What's your threshold, Brad?
I'd definitely say 10 seconds is something you get up there, but that's because I like to work in a very iterative way. So write some code, compile and run, write some code, compile and run. Every single second adds up. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I do, but I'm okay with it most of the time. Poor Web Freak says serve D takes half a minute. No. But I don't think that I would imagine that among all the D users in the world, there would be very, very few people who could make the joke about going out to get a cup of coffee while you're waiting for the build to complete. I don't think that happens too often in the D world.
Definitely amazing. Very amazing, actually, how complex metaprogramming system is, how much the compiler actually needs to do, and it's still faster than the likes of Rust and C++ and all that.
Brad, please go ahead and close us out. Any final thoughts?
I just hope the talk really opens your eyes, because D can do things not many other languages actually can. So it's kind of hard to think about kind of out of the box of what you can actually do with D. I just hope it'll help some people at least.
All right. Thank you very much. It was nice chatting to you face to face for the first time. I'll be emailing you again before too long. So if you want to stick around to hear the winner of